This new timetable, as we were talking, makes it even more difficult for MPs to try to prevent a no deal. The length of time Parliament will be in recess is unprecedented in recent times. Not hugely, but it is longer than normal, which is why some lawyers say it could be challenged in court. Opposition parties say they will still attempt to pass legislation to ban. This would require taking over parliamentary agenda, tricky even before this extended prorogation. If all else fails, a no-confidence vote. If the government loses, one that's against a no-deal Brexit could take over. Joelle Grogan is senior lecturer in law at Middlesex University. She knows every twist and turn of what could or could not happen. How much of a constitutional crisis is this tonight?
So, as a constitutional expert, I think we're very, very tempted to use this phrase as much as possible because it's so dramatic. But simply, a constitutional crisis is one in which the foundational institutions of the UK don't acknowledge each other's power. So, for example, this would be if the Queen were to ignore the government, or the Queen were to ignore Parliament, or the Parliament were to ignore government, or government, and this is the tricky one, were to ignore Parliament.
That they are doing. That is exactly what they're doing. But you were telling me that actually there's very little. I mean, they can pass debate motions which are non-binding, but there's not a lot they can actually do unless they take control.
So this is absolutely it. We have, well, control of parliamentary time always rests with government. But exceptionally, what Parliament can do, what the House of Commons can do, is they can suspend orders. They can also bring in emergency debates and emergency legislation, which is, I think, what we're going to be seeing in the next few days.
OK, so let's say in the next few days they suspend the timetable. The Speaker, who clearly is on their side, grants them a chance to get a bill through. Can they get it through?
So the big ticking clock, quite literally, is they have next to no time to do so. They have about 3-5 days of debate before suspension. And at suspension, at prorogation, everything on the floor dies. It starts again from zero. Also, that would have to pass the Commons and the Lords.
Oh, hang on a second. So if they start it before prorogation, they've got to have finished it before.
Exactly.
OK, that's tricky. That's tricky. Can they challenge prorogation itself in the courts?
So what we could see, another option, is to try and amend the legislation which governs prorogation. We could also see emergency legislation which would try and switch that or change that. Because, as you'll know from your law degree, a foundational principle of the UK Constitution is parliamentary sovereignty. We can change legislation if there's time and if there's agreement.
OK, in all of this, though, I mean, I'm getting the impression that you don't think there's much that can be done.
So, in my legal opinion, we have a very, very limited timetable. We have such limited time. You're going to need some very quick legislation in days.
Right, I can see viewers watching and listening and saying, hang on, surely all of them in there against this just have to stand up en masse and say to the Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we need to stop this, give us time. Overrule everything. You are the Speaker.
We need legislation. Legislation is key. Legislation must be passed through the Commons and the Lords with, potentially, as you said, that single line, give us more time.
And even if they do pass legislation, let's say they ban a no-deal Brexit, what do they put in its place? Because once that law... Because the other side to this is there is this fixed deadline of October the 31st. So if you say no deal is the new law, somebody else would say, well, then what do you do instead? Exactly.
You can't say no to no deal. You have to have an alternative. And the alternatives remain the same. It's either revocation, very unlikely, accepting the deal, even more unlikely, or going to the European Council on the 17th of October and asking for a further extension. Now, the qualification on that is you need all member states, all heads of all the member states, to agree to an extension. And the question for them is going to be why and how long.
I was in Brussels at the last one, up all night, and Emmanuel Macron said no, or at least played hardball. Now, finally, Her Majesty the Queen. I mean, the poor woman today was put in the most awful position. She was proven to be nothing more than a rubber stamp.
As a matter of law, I would again disagree with you. It's a foundational principle that the Queen has the power. In real terms, in political terms, I would say there was no choice, but that would go beyond my mandate. She has the power. She simply couldn't, in political terms, exercise it. As this comes back to our first point,
feel sorry
constitutional crisis.
So it is a constitutional crisis.
If she had disagreed with government, it would have been.
Never argue with a lawyer, let alone a legal academic. Really good to have you with us. Please, we're going to need you in the weeks ahead to help us understand what's happening. Send the bill to the usual place.